Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and today's episode is one that really hits close to the heart. But also, we probably should put a little warning out there that there are going to be conversations around some pretty heavy topics, including suicide. So just want to put that warning out there for you. But joining me today is Lisa Sugarman, an author, nationally syndicated columnist, and passionate mental health advocate who's turned her personal pain into powerful purpose. Lisa is a 3-time survivor of suicide loss, a storyteller with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project, and the founder of the HelpHUB, a comprehensive and free online mental health resource platform. Lisa's mission is clear: to make mental health support accessible, human, and deeply personal. Whether she's writing books like Life Is What It Is or How to Raise Perfectly Imperfect Kids, co-hosting the Survivors podcast, or facilitating virtual support groups through Samaritans, Lisa shows up with compassion, honesty, and the kind of real-life experience that makes others feel seen. In this conversation, we're diving into grief, suicide loss, mental health advocacy, and how we can better support ourselves and each other. If you've ever felt alone in your mental health journey, or if you're supporting someone else in theirs, this episode is definitely for you. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. That was just absolutely beautiful, and I appreciate you letting everyone know just kind of what I'm out here doing in the world. So thank you for that, and thank you for just having the space for this conversation.
Of course, I think, as I said to you before we hit record, I think more than ever, we need this type of conversation out there for many, many reasons. There's just a lot going on, and it's heavy for a lot of people right now. So I think it's good to get the topic out there and sort of a little more mainstream. And I think that's a little bit about what you're going to talk to us about. But I'd like to just start by setting the stage and back up and talk about, you experienced 3 losses related to suicide. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I've ever heard that before. So fairly uncommon. And I can only imagine all the things that come with that. Thankfully, I can only imagine it. Can you share a little bit about how those experiences sort of led you into this work, and kind of what really resonated with you to make you feel like this is where your passion would be?
Absolutely, of course. And I appreciate you asking the question. It's definitely a unique club that I'm in, if we're calling it a club. It's not a club that anyone wants to be a part of, but unfortunately, it's my past, and it's what's brought me up to this point. So you mentioned I'm a 3-time survivor of suicide loss, and that's true. And that started way back. I'm in my mid-50s now, and it started when I was 9 years old. My cousin took his own life. He lived up the street and around the corner from me. It was very, very sudden. And it was my first experience with death, with losing a family member in that capacity at all, that close to home. And on top of that, it was a suicide. And even though I was a 9-year-old kid at the time, my parents were fairly open with me in as much as I understood that my cousin had taken his own life. They gave me very age-appropriate details. Everything at that time, there are certain things you just remember so vividly. And I remember at that time, it was so chaotic. It was my mother's older sister's son. It was, like I said, very sudden. And I was told what I needed to know for the purposes of just understanding what was happening. Then a year following my cousin's death, I lost my father. And what makes my story, you said it's unique because I've lost so many people to suicide, which of course makes it unique. But what makes my story even a little more unique is that I've actually lost my father twice in my life. And the reason for that is because a year after my cousin passed away, we lost my father very suddenly to what I was told was a heart attack. I had no reason to question that. I was a 10-year-old kid. My father was a very, very healthy, very active man. He was also a smoker, very heavy smoker. I knew just by virtue of my family history that we had other family members on my father's side who had had heart disease. So you connect dots. And it was a very reasonable, it was a traumatizing experience, but it was a reasonable experience. I understood it. It was beyond anyone's control. And that was the narrative that I lived with for 35 years of my life, from the time I was 10 years old until I was 45 years old, when I discovered that my father had actually died by suicide.
Wow.
And it just restarted the whole clock all over again. And it restarted the grieving process all over again. Only now I had been married at that time 20 years. I had two teenage children at the time. And I was a grown woman. So my grieving process was something entirely different, but it started like it was day one, minute one, all over again. And the rawness and the intensity and the trauma was equally as strong as it was when I was a kid, but now it was layered by suicide loss, which was completely impossible to me in the beginning to even comprehend, because my dad was just a larger than life, outgoing, kind, just very present, family oriented man. And he was one of those people you would never, ever suspect that anything was wrong with him, because he kept everything on the inside. And it was a world where people didn't talk about their mental health in the 1970s.
Right.
So that loss it just created a chain reaction for me in terms of the rest of my life. So that discovery was about 11 years ago now. And since that time, I also learned one of our dearest friends, we actually just passed the 4-year anniversary of him taking his life. This is somebody who we were little kids together, grew up together. He and my husband and we were all super close friends. We lived together outside of college, in each other's weddings. So
Wow.
yeah, that was the most recent one. So I've kind of got a really nasty little trifecta of suicide in my past. And so that's the context to answer the question of how did I get involved doing what I'm doing. I mean, I've been a content creator forever. I write books. You mentioned I write a column. I do an awful lot in that space, but it was all really focused on parenting and family and work-life balance and kind of that world. And then finding out about my father really just blew something up in me. It blew me up, to be honest with you. And it really just changed my path. I really didn't feel like doing the work, creating the content I was creating was really in alignment anymore with what I felt I needed to be talking about. I mean, the more you get involved in a community or on a platform or with a cause, the more everything that you do seems to kind of revolve around that thing. And so here I was trying to understand, like I had had suicide loss in my life, but it hits different when it's your dad.
Yeah, of course.
And when it's one of your closest friends. And it really, like I said, it ignited something in me to just change course and to really start talking about it and really try to understand it and try to mainstream it just through conversations like you and I are having. Just put it out into the world in a way that it's not scary for people to have these conversations and to say the word suicide and to talk about their lived experience. So little by little, I really just started talking about it, and that really just led to writing about it and ultimately changed everything for me. It led me to discover that there's a need out there for a place where anybody in any community with any kind of an issue can find the resources they need kind of under one roof. That was really the impetus for founding the HelpHUB, and we can talk as much as you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah.
But everything now that I do in the world really focuses on mental health as a whole, health and wellness, but suicide awareness and prevention and the grief that's attached to that, because it's so different. It's different than someone dying by a heart attack or someone getting hit by a car. There are so many different nuances and pieces of it that don't exist if someone gets killed in a car crash. There are no unanswered questions usually. There's no guilt.
Yeah.
There are things that just don't
Yeah.
exist with another kind of loss. So that's what I'm putting out into the world, and I'm doing it in a lot of different ways, a lot of different spaces with a lot of great collaborations. And I love just having this opportunity just to come on and have these really honest, transparent conversations about what I went through, which I know something that a lot of other people in the world are going through everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter who you are in the world. This kind of experience happens. It happens everywhere.
Yeah.
And the more we can put it out in the mainstream, I think the better people can cope with it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm curious about those feelings. You talked about some of the nuances, and you do hear about there is anger and regret and all these unanswered questions, and suicide leaves people with more of that than is typical, probably in a death. I guess sudden death, some of that, but maybe not as much. And we don't have to play the comparison game. I guess it's just my thought is, how did you navigate through that yourself? And I couldn't help but wonder when you said you didn't know for all those years and then you found out 11 years ago. Did you feel some of those same things toward your mom because she never told you?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it, because I know it's a question when people hear my story, inevitably that's one of the first questions that comes up. So I'll answer that part first. So my mother is the most remarkable human being anyone will ever meet. She is just a force. She's about this big for anybody who's not looking at this video. My fingers they're about 2 inches. Right. She's like a little action figure. And she saved me. I mean, if I can put it in one way that people can really understand, my mother saved me in all the ways that a human can be saved when they're faced with that kind of trauma. So the answer to your question is no, never, not a single second. Since the day that I found out the truth about my father's suicide, I have felt absolutely nothing but gratitude and love toward my mom.
Wow.
For shielding me, because that's what she did. It was very much a game time decision. I mean, everything, as I said, was super chaotic. She was not expecting any of that. My father showed no real signs or signals that anything was wrong until the very, very, very end. He did seem a little off to her, but not in a concerning kind of way. Just I know your job is very overwhelming, and he was working for his family. My grandparents had a real estate business, and he was kind of double dipping and helping to run that. So he had a lot on his plate. So she kind of attributed it to that. But when she found out, I mean, I'm an only child. So you find out that your partner just took his life. You've been married for 18 years. You have a 10-year-old child. And my dad was my best friend in the world at that time. So in her mind, she not only has to tell me that my father is gone, but then she has to somehow tell me that my father ended his own life and chose to leave us. And she said in that moment, she couldn't do it. She said the trauma that I would already have to endure, just knowing that my father was gone, and the shock of it all and the disbelief of it all, she said she just couldn't bring herself to compound all that and to layer something else that would just throw everything and everyone upside down and create so much more pain and so much more chaos. So in that moment, so my father had written a note, and it was a very, very short note that the gist of it was, "I'm sorry, I love you both. I can't go on." It was very, very brief. There was no real explanation of, well, this thing happened, or I've been struggling with this. There was no real context other than, I'm struggling. I can't go on. And my parents had a beautiful marriage, a beautiful relationship. I woke up every morning to those sounds of my parents just having coffee and laughing in the kitchen. That was every day of my life. And so she found this note, and immediately she read it once, immediately ripped it up and flushed it down the toilet so I would never find it because I was, she thought of me as an inquisitive little kid who was always hunting and seeking and looking for answers to any little thing. If I were to ever stumble on that, it could change so much for me. So she made sure she got rid of anything that would ever show me the truth. And then she made the conscious decision to say that it was a heart attack. And that's what she told everyone. There were a couple of family members, her sister and my grandmother, they knew that something, my aunt was the one who found the note addressed to my mother. So it was pretty clear cut what had happened. My aunt didn't read the note, but she found a note addressed to my mother. So, in that sense, she understood. She put those two things together. My mother just resigned herself to telling me and the rest of the world that it was a heart attack. And that is exactly what she did for 35 years.
Wow.
Yeah. But I mean, finding out the truth, was like an atom bomb going off in your face. You can't see clearly. You can't feel anything. You go completely numb. You feel like you're not even connected to this place anymore because everything feels so chaotic. And that's the way it was for a really long time, mainly because my dad was such an easygoing guy.
What would you say? What do you attribute to helping you the most with getting out of that, with working through that?
I think for me personally, there are a few things that have helped. I think the most helpful thing is to be honest and open and talk about it and to be vulnerable and to share that story and to have these kinds of conversations. It didn't happen right away. I didn't tell people right away. The only person outside of my mother who knew the truth for the first few years was my husband, Dave. He was the only one. So I would either talk about it with her or I would talk about it with Dave. I cried every night for 3 years. I cried myself to sleep. How my kids who had bedrooms across the hall, they were young kids at the time. They were teens at the time. They didn't know. And it was only after a few years of really kind of processing it all and sitting with it all and just having endless conversations about it, just between my mom and my husband, that I finally got to a point where I said, okay, the girls are now old enough. Like they really need to know. I felt really strongly that they needed to know because we inherit so much from the people who come before us. There's inherited grief, there's inherited trauma, there's inherited behaviors, mental illness, addictions. I mean, so many different things can be passed down to us. And I didn't want my children, I mean, we have 2 daughters, I didn't want them to ever be at a point in their life where they started feeling like something was wrong. If they ended up having some of that DNA that caused them to have mental illness, I wanted them to understand, like, okay, this is where it comes from.
Yeah.
It's on dad's side. There's a lot on my side. Let's talk about it. Let's get help for it. Let's keep the communication going. Let's get you the resources you need. I wanted to tee things up so that they would have that knowledge. And then once I told them, it really was kind of just a ripple effect. I really just stopped using the old narrative about my father having a heart attack. And it was one day I just kind of switched the switch and started being very transparent about what had really happened. And then that's when I started, once my family and friends and children knew, then I didn't stop talking about it. Then that's when everything professionally, the work I was doing, really just almost overnight, it transformed.
You were ready to tell your story.
Yeah, look, they say there's a time and a place for everything, and that was my time and place.
Yeah. I can't help but get this question out of my head since you were talking about your story of learning about your cousin and then your father dying. You said your parents talked really openly, as age appropriately, but openly about your cousin's suicide. I'm just curious if you've looked back on that at all and thought about what your dad said in that time, because it's so interesting to me that 1 year later, he would take his own life. Now, you didn't know that back then, but you do know it all now. So I'm just curious about what he said in that moment about the cousin's suicide. It's just interesting to me as to what he might have been thinking about it.
Yeah, it's so funny because I share my story so much on different podcast platforms and in different capacities. And I've been asked so many different questions over the years. That's the first time anyone has ever asked me that. And it's a really thought-provoking question for me. It really gets me kind of into my head about it and brings me right back to that. And I have to be really honest with you. I mean, at that time I was 9. There are so many things about that time period that I do remember. I remember my mother getting the phone call from the family member about my cousin. I remember my mother being in the hallway of the kitchen. You know how everybody had the phone on the kitchen wall that had the long cord? I
Yeah.
remember my mother going out
Yeah.
the door of the kitchen and into the hallway, and I remember her crying, and remember kind of being shuttled off to my cousin's house because my parents had to help my aunt and uncle. And I remember so much of that time. And I remember them telling me, but when I really think about it, it wasn't my father.
It was your mom. Everything you just said is my mom. I remember my mom. I remember my mom.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just curious. Maybe dad was sitting back a little bit removed from it for a reason. I don't know.
It
I
could have
just,
been. Yeah.
I tried to pass it, but it just kept coming to my head. So I was like, I got to ask this question.
I'm really, really glad that you did, because that's interesting. When you and I finish today, I am making a beeline to the phone to call my mom to ask her, yeah, to see if she has any memories. I mean, I clearly remember, vividly remember him being there and being in the car and them driving me to my cousin's house to stay for a couple of days so that they could kind of handle all the family business. And again, I don't remember. I know he was there for the conversations. I couldn't tell you a single word that came out of his mouth, and I think it's because it was my mom.
Well, and that's so interesting that it's so mom forward since you were so close to dad. So
Hmm.
that's also interesting to me. But I was just curious if he did say anything, did he come at it with compassion and, that angle, or was an empathy, or was he coming at it like we often hear, like, oh, that's, so selfish or something like that, that we know is not the truth, but it is often said. So I was just curious if maybe he took one side of that or the other. So you'll have
No,
to, you'll have to let me know what mom
I
said.
I will absolutely let you know. But you just said something that really kind of struck me, because it's something that I struggled with for a long time. You talked about how suicide is so often thought of as a selfish act.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that that was always my belief system. From the time I learned about suicide and what it meant, what it involved, I automatically, and for no other reason than it just happened in my own brain kind of organically, I've always thought that suicide was a selfish act for the majority of my youth and young adult life, probably up until the time that I learned my own father had taken his life. I always felt it was a selfish act, and it was not at all because that was something that my parents instilled in me or conversations that we had. That never existed. It just was born out of my own little 9 or 10-year-old brain. And it was just the beliefs that stayed with me until I learned that my own father had taken his life. And at that point, I was doing crazy deep dives, like talk about rabbit holes, going down rabbit holes. I was watching, I think there was a year where I did nothing but watch YouTube videos from people who had either lost people to suicide, people who had attempted and not completed suicide, or there are actually a few people who, like for instance, there's a very famous in the mental health world, famous story of a guy who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and
Hmm.
he lived. He jumped
Yeah.
to, yeah, to take his life, but he lived. And so there's someone who, for all intents and purposes, had completed the act, but
Yeah.
he didn't take his life ultimately. And I just dug so deeply into those stories to understand, like, why. And it was almost overnight when it dawned on me. And it's so simple. Like, it's so simple, the reality that mental illness is an illness that
Yeah.
cannot be controlled, like cancer. You can't control the cancer, you can't control a heart disease or things like that. It's no different for mental illness. And it was like when that light bulb just blew up in my head, everything changed for me. And I recognized how beyond someone's control it is. And when they're at that point, when they're at that level and they're that sick and they're that hopeless and desperate, the only thing that they're thinking about is I want the pain to stop.
Yeah.
I want the voices to end. I want to be in control again. I'm not in control. They're not thinking about who they're leaving behind. They're not thinking about what anyone else has to deal with when they're gone. It's strictly, there's a singular focus, and it's stop that pain. And sometimes suicide represents the only act that they have left within their control to help themselves.
Hey there. I don't typically jump into the middle of an episode, but I felt the need to this time. I just wanted to remind you, if you know anybody that's going through something like this, that's struggling with their mental health, that could use another perspective, or maybe they've gone through an experience of having a loved one commit suicide, I really hope you'll consider sharing this episode with them so they can understand how Lisa has gone through that, and they'll understand some of the options that are out there to support them. Thanks again for listening. I truly do appreciate it. Now let's jump in and get back to the conversation with Lisa. There's still a lot to unpack. A few things come to my mind. I think that while your parents maybe didn't instill in you that it was a selfish act, I think we grew up in a time where there had to be messaging, because I'm a very similar age as you. And, I would be lying if I didn't say that I have a bias that my brain automatically wants to go to that thought. And I haven't, thank God, personally been through this with anybody in my family. But I know enough knowledge-wise, brain-wise to take that away, stop. Like when my brain goes, I'm like, no, that's not true, right? But it is my immediate reaction. It is my default position, if you will. And I think we grew up in a time where that messaging was there. And I certainly don't think it was from my household either, because quite frankly, I don't think we talked about it at home. I don't know about you, but well, you did because you had the experience with your cousin, but I don't think it was an everyday conversation within families back in the day when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we got it somehow, messaging out in the world, we picked up on. That was one thing. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is that I think, to me, the best way I can relate to it now as an adult and get myself away from that default is almost everybody has dealt with somebody or heard of somebody in their family or somebody close to them that's had an addiction. And similarly, we can all say, how did they choose that drug or that drink over their family? They had such a beautiful family. They had the house, they had the job, they had all the things. And yet they chose to do the drug. Or they had a great family. Maybe they didn't have all the things if it's a younger person. Whatever. They had everything in front of them. And yet they chose the drug. How did they choose the drug? Well, they choose the drug because they're addicted to the drug. Because in my mind anyway, and I know some people will argue, it's a disease. And I think until you're yourself in that, your brain is in that spot, you'll never really wrap your head around it.
You can't.
I just don't think we that aren't going through it can really wrap our head around how they can choose the drug versus their parent or the drug versus their wife or husband or whatever. I just don't think you can. And I feel like it's similar. I think we probably can't really put our head around how they could take that last act and then leave all the pieces for everybody else to have to work through. I don't think we can rationalize it. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is rationalize it.
Right. And we can't rationalize it. And when someone is in that state of desperation, because that's what it is, it's a depressive state. It's a byproduct of depression, which is a byproduct of mental illness. And unfortunately, in so many cases, the outcome is the person just focused on making those voices or those feelings stop. So, we think, how could they this? How could they that? How could they leave all the people and such collateral damage? It's not what someone is thinking. I mean, that's one of the things that I spent an awful lot of time doing, was listening to conversations, to reading, essays from people who had attempted and had either stopped themselves or it was a failed attempt, and what was going through your brain. And every single one of them says the same thing. We're not thinking about anybody. We're not worrying about or consumed by what is going to happen to our family or our friends or the people in our orbit. We're not thinking in those terms.
Yeah.
They're only thinking about that pain and about ending it. And I think that's where all the confusion and the disconnect comes in. And then you said something else, which is so unbelievably relevant. who was talking about mental illness or even mental health or wellness 40, 50 years ago? They weren't. And on the contrary, they weren't, because it was considered taboo. And we were taught that it was taboo. I mean, you look no further than the language that people used then and still in a lot of cases use now. When you say something like committed suicide, it inevitably stereotypes the person who died with a negative connotation. You say that word and immediately people conjure up committing a sin or committing a crime or committing an immoral act of some kind. And there's this negativity attached to it. And so the way that we, and I say we, like I'm talking culturally, as a society, as a culture, the way that we perceive things, whatever the thing is a direct result of the way that we talk about the thing.
Yes.
So when we're talking about the thing using language that kind of sort of puts blame on someone or makes the person who ended their life seem somehow like they've done something wrong, then that automatically they've become stereotyped.
Yeah.
And it creates that sense of tabooness, which is why there's such a huge movement within the mental health community now, and has been for the last couple of years, to really change the language altogether when we're talking about suicide. So we don't say committed suicide anymore. We say ended their life or died by suicide or suicided, so that we preserve that person's dignity, and so that we at the same time can chip away at that stigma from the inside.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I was just thinking that I think the conversation on mental health, period, has changed so much. And I have a 36-year-old and a 30-year-old, but the 36-year-old is the one that I was thinking about. And the conversations they're having with their children is just very different. They do have conversations about mental health, and we too have mental health, things, I'll say, in our family, different things, but they're there. And it's open. It's a very open topic, and it's not stigmatized at all. And talking about some people need medication, just like you do for heart disease, and that's okay. And even when they start feeling better, they still need their medication because they need to keep it, those kinds of conversations. I can't even imagine having that conversation with my parents when I was their age. But
no, nobody was having those conversations with their parents at our age.
Yeah, but
Never.
It's great. It's my whole point in that is I was thinking as you were saying it, I do think it's shifting. It's never fast enough. It's never wide enough. It's never deep enough. But at least the signs are there that we're going in the right direction on this thing. And that makes me happy. And so on that front, I'd like to switch into, because I want to make sure you have enough time to talk to us about the HelpHUB.
Mm-hmm.
Give for our listener, tell us a little bit about it and what gap were you trying to fill with it?
Well, one of the things I love talking about the most these days is the HelpHUB. It's something that I'm very, very proud of. I'm very excited about because of the reaction that I'm getting from people within the mental health community, kind of across the board. So I'll give you a little context. First, I'll explain the HelpHUB and what it is, and then I'll give you some context where it came from and answer the question about what was the need that I was filling. So the HelpHUB, if you go to thehelphub.co, you'll land on a platform that is completely free. All the content and resources on this platform are currently free, will always be free. I don't ever want there to be a barrier to someone getting the help and resources and tools that they need to better their overall wellness. It's a platform that is designed to be hyper inclusive. So there are different categories. In fact, there are 16 different categories. And when I say categories, I guess I really mean communities that are represented. The origin of the HelpHUB is that I do work as a crisis counselor. I've been a crisis counselor for almost 3 years with the Trevor Project. If anyone does not know what that is, it's the largest LGBTQ crisis and suicide hotline that caters to at-risk youth ages 13 to 24. So I am one of their lifeline counselors, and I'm taking calls from people who have all sorts of mental health issues and crises, not just suicidal. But as a lifeline counselor, you see a lot. I mean, you see a cross section of human beings from all walks of life. We get calls, our call center. I might be talking to someone from California or from Boston or from the South or the North. It doesn't matter. And what I realized is that everyone's struggling with a lot of the same things. We all struggle with grief. We all struggle with loss. We all struggle at times with things like loneliness or hopelessness or sadness or depression, maybe job loss, whatever it is, a breakup, whatever it is. But the way that we struggle with it is different depending on the community that we're in. And depending on our socioeconomic background, our race, our religion, maybe where we live in the world, it's different. But there's no one place. I didn't find one singular place where a person could go to get a resource that was designed for them and their specific community. Like, for instance, if someone from the LGBTQ community was looking for a resource and going to, let's say they went to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to get resources from that organization, which is an amazing, amazing organization doing incredible work to prevent suicide. It's fairly generic information. There isn't anything that might be specific to the LGBTQ community or to the BIPOC community or to the veterans community. It's very generalized. And not to say that that's a bad thing. It's not. It's a great thing that these resources exist. But sometimes you just need something a little bit different depending on who you are and what you're going through. And when you're in crisis, whatever your crisis is, the last thing in the world somebody has the capacity to do is use their brain to think, okay, where can I find what I need? I'm not sure what I need. Where do I go? Who can I trust? How do I get there? The last thing in the world that you can do is help yourself in a lot of cases, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I saw a real absence of kind of a one-stop shop, if that makes sense. So I started accumulating well over a year ago now. I started accumulating sites, whether it be sites that offered resources or maybe tools or maybe content, whatever it was. And I started accumulating them, and I ended up creating this crazy long list of organizations that had no structure. I think it was alphabetized, and that was about the only structure that it had. And it ended up being about 97 miles long, this list, after a period of my collecting them and vetting everything. And the intention was to just create a resource page on my existing website. Ultimately, I ended up kind of breaking everything apart and deciding to create individual categories. Like I mentioned, some of them: veterans, the elderly, children and parents, the queer community, Latinx, Asian, AAPI. I mean, all of these different communities. So I sectioned everything off into unique communities. And ultimately, this one resource tab on my lisasugarman.com website at the time became the HelpHUB. Completely transformed my website. I took everything down to the studs. I rebuilt everything. I rebranded everything. And now that resource hub, when you land on the HelpHUB, the very first thing you see is a grid with little thumbnail pictures. It has each community very visible, very, very accessible. You click on, you're a veteran, you're looking for resources for your mental health. You click on the veterans tab. It takes you to a separate page, and all of the resources on that page are focused on veterans, have been vetted, are reliable, and it's one click away. So that's what the HelpHUB is. And now we've got a YouTube channel. I create a lot of video content, short form video content around different issues. The videos are, I would say, more generic, but a lot of them are suicide related. A lot of them are grief and loss related. A lot of them are self-care related. I started my own podcast with I have an amazing co-host who already has a very successful podcast of her own, mental health related podcast, but she's a survivor of a suicide attempt. I'm a multiple survivor of suicide loss. We're both advocates, and we created a podcast called The Survivors. So it's two unique perspectives on the same issue, and we just kind of hash it all out each week. That funnels through the HelpHUB. And I have a very, very extensive catalog, library, I guess you can call it, of content that I've created, both written and video. And then a toolkit section where I've curated tons and dozens and dozens of really just like infographic sheets. If you're having a crisis and you need to re-regulate yourself, you can find something to find a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you know, calming exercise. Or if you're experiencing a grief attack and you don't know what's going on, it'll walk you through it. If you're talking to someone who wants to take their life and you don't know how to handle it, I give you language to use, suggestions, talking points, things like that. So there are tons and tons of resources. And the HelpHUB has just become this destination for all of this hopefully helpful, life-saving content designed to help people in the moment with whatever crisis they might be facing. So that's the long answer.
Well, I like that answer because a couple things jumped out at me. While there's some generalized information, people do tend to feel like, oh, but that's not about me. Like they don't feel like it's their specific twist, whether it's culture or nationality or ethnicity, whatever the word is, whatever the sexual gender, whatever, orientation, whatever. I think having it so that they can go down the path that most relates to them probably is a better fit. And then the other thing that jumps out at me is that, listen, in today's day and age, information is everywhere. You can get information anywhere and everywhere. But sometimes the process of getting it is just so overwhelming that having someone curate all that information and put it in a meaningful way that you can easily get to and easily navigate it's a huge benefit for people. So hopefully you'll see that and it'll continue to grow for you. But I could definitely, those things jump out at me immediately. Yeah. I'm curious, based on curating all this information, if you had to put some top practical things out there that people can do, if you know somebody that's struggling, maybe somebody that doesn't even talk about it out loud, but you just kind of know, what advice would you give to the person that's supporting them, surrounding them, with them?
It's a hard position to be in because people want to be helpful. I think on a basic level, we all want to help each other. We all want to be there to support each other. But it's super scary.
Yeah.
First of all, it's scary because you don't want to say anything that's going to make something worse for someone.
Yes. Yes.
And also, it's hard because while a lot of people are so well-intentioned and they want to say, are you okay? What's going on? How can I help? A lot of people are really afraid of the answer because when the person you're trying to help comes back and says, actually, yeah, I'm really struggling, or yeah, I really am done. I would like to end it all. That's terrifying because now you're in a position of knowing that this person is struggling and knowing that this person is feeling desperate, and what you say and how you say it and what kind of help you offer could be you're in a very precarious position because it could either really help or really hurt the situation. So people are afraid because they don't want to make anything worse.
Yeah.
So what I would say to anyone listening to this is what I say to anyone whenever this question is asked. It's not, if you're the one trying to support someone, whether you suspect someone's not okay or you know for a fact this person's not okay, it is not your job to fix that person's problem. It's not my job. When I'm on the crisis lifelines, I'm the person they're calling. It isn't my job to fix their problem. What my job is, and what a friend or an ally's job is to hold space, is to be there to support. And by holding space, I mean really just listening to what that person is going through. It's our job to validate what that person's going through, because most often when you're locked in your own head and you're spiraling and these recurring thought loops are just hitting you from all sides and you don't have that sense of reality anymore, it's very, very difficult to get yourself out of that position. And sometimes when someone does just the simple act of validating, like, hey, I know you're struggling. I can see that things are really, really hard for you. Like whatever the person says to you, validate it. It doesn't matter if it's the most outlandish, ridiculous thing you've ever heard in the world. That's that person's problem. That's what's got them wrapped around the axle. That's what they're struggling with. We can't judge what someone else is struggling with, because what you might be able to handle, no sweat, is something that could put me in a ball on the bathroom floor.
Yeah.
It's all totally relative. So if you're someone who is trying to help someone who's struggling, just be there to listen. Let them know that you're there for them. Check in on them. Don't ask them yes and no questions. Ask them open-ended questions that kind of forces them or encourages them to talk about what's really going on. You ask a yes or no question, someone's going to yes or no you to death, and you'll never have a single clue what's going on with them. So ask questions that require an actual answer. And then the biggest thing in the world that anyone can do to help someone who's struggling is to encourage them to get professional help. So if you know that they have a therapist, encourage them to go to a therapist. If they don't have a therapist, offer to help them find a therapist. And if they don't have any support system and they feel alone, you have them call 988. You have them call the crisis and suicide hotline that is free. It's 24/7, 365. There are people who are trained to de-escalate crises. There are people who are trained to create safety plans, who are capable of doing callbacks to check on someone or to do an intervention if someone really is in a bad place and can't help themselves. So, and they're trained to listen. So even when we think, God, what can I possibly offer this person to help? Like, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a first responder. What can I do? That's what you can do. You offer to listen and you give them the 988 crisis lifeline. And you can call for them. You can do something called a third party call. If your friend is like, okay, yeah, I want to call, but I can't. Can you call for me? Yep, you sure can.
Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't. We get third party calls all the time. Maybe it's a parent calling on behalf of a child or a spouse, their partner or a friend, and you can have that conversation. And maybe it's just you kind of being that conduit between 988 and your person, or maybe eventually you bring your person on the line and you can kind of transfer the call over to the person who's struggling. There are a lot of different ways that you can handle it, but it's an option.
I love that. I love the acknowledgement that you gave out the door that it's not your problem to solve, because for so many of us, right, our natural inclination is to try to solve it. That's just what we do. I'm thinking, especially as moms, that's just, we try to solve things for people. And hearing that and telling people to keep that in mind, that it's not your problem to solve, just be there. I think that's huge. I really do. I think that's huge. And I'm not sure, it may seem obvious, but I don't think it's obvious.
No. It's not obvious at all, number one. And number two, I think that it's very freeing.
Yeah.
It's very comforting when someone gets permission to cut themselves loose of that responsibility. That's a huge burden to bear.
Yeah.
When you think that everything is riding on your ability to solve someone's issue. Like, we can't make someone do the work. We can't make someone be vulnerable or talk or seek help or go into a program. We can't do that. I mean, obviously there are things, you can section someone, and if they're a threat to themselves, there are different circumstances. But the average person who is struggling and maybe who doesn't need to be hospitalized but needs help, you can't make them get that help if they don't want to get that help. Yeah. It's as simple as that. So knowing that you can kind of absolve yourself from the jump of any of that responsibility of being the person to fix it, I think that frees people up in ways that allow them to really just show up as they are and offer what they can and be the best support that they can be. So all you can do is listen.
I wonder if you have any similar words of wisdom on the opposite side, because I think as a survivor of somebody who took their life, I feel like the guilt thing has to be very prevalent. And I have to feel that most people probably go down the path of, if only I did this, if only I saw this, if only I called, if only I knew they were struggling and I didn't stay with them overnight, or I didn't take the pill, whatever it is. what words of wisdom do you have there for that person to similarly, because we know logically there isn't a if only, because it wasn't yours to solve and you couldn't have stopped it. But that's not necessarily, just because we know that logically doesn't mean our brains don't go there and cause us this crazy emotional ride.
Yeah, that's a really hard one. That's one of the tenets, I guess. There are, so many different tenets, pillars, whatever you might call them. Nuances, I guess, is the best word, that make suicide, loss, and grief so different. It hits different because you have these elements to it, like the one you're talking about, like this guilt, that can be so overpowering and so resistant to reason and logic. Like your head's telling you, like, oh my God, it was not my fault or responsibility, or I couldn't have stopped it. There's no rational way. But then your heart is like, no, 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 no.
Yes.
Like you're devastated and inconsolable. So it's a really hard one. I mean, look, I was 10 years old when my father died. What I was told was that he had a heart attack. So for 35 years of my life, there was no guilt associated with that because I knew that it was beyond anyone's control. It was instantaneous, the way it was described to me. He passed away peacefully in his sleep. There was no guilt that was a part of that for me. Flash forward 35 years, finding out it was a suicide. I was 10 years old. And what I don't often tell people when I have these interviews, doesn't usually come up, is that my father we had a 2-floor house, a split level house, and the bedrooms were all upstairs and the family room was downstairs. And my father, everything was premeditated. So he knew what he was doing. My father had told my mother that he was going to sleep downstairs. We had a pull-out couch. He was going to sleep downstairs because he had had dental surgery and he was taking medication and he didn't want to wake her up to have to take meds at night. So he was going to sleep down there. He was going to watch the baseball game and so on. And he had already said he was staying home from work the next day. He was supposed to meet my mother for lunch. The reason I'm telling you this is because I was awake early in the morning, and it was always so exciting for me if my father was ever home during the morning time, because he was always gone usually before I got up. And he was home, and this was the summer, and I was going off to camp, and I snuck downstairs. When I found out that he was home and he had slept downstairs, I snuck down the stairs. I wanted to sneak into bed with him and wake him up and say goodbye before I went to camp. And I stopped on the bottom step, and I saw the silhouette of my father asleep, had his arm kind of over his head the way he always used to sleep. And my mother caught me before I hit the bottom of the staircase and whispered to me, come on, come back upstairs. You've got to eat your breakfast and we've got to make the camp bus. And Daddy was up watching the baseball game late. Let him sleep. I have had guilt. I don't talk about it very often, but it's in my heart. We don't know what time he expired that night. What if and he wasn't found until the afternoon. So what if I had gone down? Could I have changed the outcome? Like, you just never know. And I have worked for a long time to try and, I guess, reconcile. Is there a way to reconcile that? I don't know. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you just have to give yourself permission to absolve yourself, because like we talked about a few minutes ago, if someone wants to do the thing, they're going to do the thing regardless of all the support and guidance and love and resources. They're going to do the thing. And if they can't help themselves, we can't force it beyond a certain point. So I don't know that that's necessarily wisdom. It's just reality.
It is, because what I hear is it's one of those awful things that we just have to walk through. And I hear that it takes time because you're 11 years into this. And and for me, I can see there was a slight shift. So there's still some pain there. And for the listener, you gave me permission to ask anything and go anywhere. So I
did. Yes, I did.
I feel okay about that. But my heart is bummed out that I took you down this path, because I can feel.
No, don't be. I'm grateful for it. I am. I really am.
It tells me, though, that the message we need our listener to hear is that it is one of those awful things and you just have to get through it. And even the most trained, most practiced, most knowledgeable person who in their head knows all the things, they still have to go through that, and they still deal with the ups and downs of it, and they still have to fight the urge to feel
the head
something.
and the heart.
Yeah, that disconnect between the head and the heart. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, you just said something that maybe could be considered the nugget of wisdom that you were asking for. It made me think about one of the things that I've done an awful lot of, and that I talk an awful lot about doing when I talk about this, is sitting in it. We have to sit in all of it, whatever. And when I say it, I mean that in a very general way. Whatever trauma, whatever loss, whatever grief, whatever sadness, whatever your thing is that you're dealing with, the only way through it is through it.
Yeah.
We can't go around it. We can't snake under it.
Try.
We can't. We can't because it comes back and it bites us on the ass every single time. There are certain things in life that you can't outrun.
Yes.
And those feelings, you said it yourself, doesn't matter how well educated you are, it doesn't matter how much common sense you have or how much lived experience you have. Like, these are the hardest things: grief, loss, sadness, depression. Like, these are the things that they are universal, and we all go through them. And the only way to address them, and just because you sit in it does not mean that that's a guaranteed, well, you're going to sit in it for a little bit and then you're fixed it. It's all set. That's not how it works. I wish it was how it worked. But what sitting in it does allows you to feel it, allows you to process it, allows it to move through you in different ways, so that maybe the next time you're burdened by those feelings or affected by those feelings, maybe it won't be quite as harsh. Maybe you'll have a different perspective. Maybe your heart will somehow be a little lighter. Who knows? It's different for everybody. But sitting in it and allowing yourself to deal with it in whatever way you have to, it's part of the process. It is just part of the process. And what we're ultimately doing, we're always grieving. There's no end point to grief and to loss, with whether it be suicide loss or any other kind of loss. When we're grieving, it's a cyclical process, and it's ongoing. And we really kind of have to resign ourselves to that. What happens is that we learn how to integrate it into the rest of our life. And then we learn over time that grief, for instance, grief and joy can still coexist. So good. Such a meaningful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today and sharing all that you've been through and all the lessons that you have, and spending your time and making this your life's work. I know it's going to make a difference. So thank you for all of that. I hope so. You are so welcome. And thank you for these were such meaningful questions. I mean, I hope it was a powerful conversation for others, for those who are listening, but I know that it was a powerful one for me, and I'm leaving it with a fuller heart than when I started. So I appreciate you for all that. Same. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.